Just a few more days until we complete Route 66 and we're back in another Springfield. Springfield, Missouri was the birthplace of the name Route 66, and Springfield, Illinois is also a birthplace. The birthplace of the corn dog. Oh, better not say that too loud. You see, around here they call it a cozy dog. After getting out of the military and returning to Springfield, Illinois, a man by the name of Ed Waldmeyer Jr. perfected a recipe for sticky batter that would go on a hot dog on a stick, be fried, and then served. He was calling his concoctions the Crusty Cur, but his wife didn't think that was a good name, and I concur. Eating a crusty cur sounds pretty disgusting. Since the hot dogs look so warm and cozy in their little battery blanket, she convinced him to call them Cozy Dogs, and a legend was born. It's not the original building. I think this one's only been here for 20, 21 years, something like that. But Cozy Dogs are still being served up on the side of Route 66, and this place is still run by the family. I personally can't eat corn dogs or cozy dogs because, you know, gluten. But that doesn't stop me from appreciating a legendary institution. My favorite part is the sign on the front that just says, food, food. Side note, Ed Waldmeyer was also the father of Bob Waldmeyer, the artist whose art we've been seeing all up and down the Morher Road. There's some Bob Waldmeyer art right there on the front of the building. I can't eat a cozy dog, but I am thirsty. I can, however, have the soda. That'll wake you up in the morning, boy. Wow, this was the original bar back from the Hackberry General Store. Bob Waldmeyer brought it here to house his dad's book collection. That's super awesome that this place is still family owned and operated and full of history. Wow, look at all this stuff. Plenty of Bob Waldmeyer's art for sale in here. That's pretty cool. Like, wow, check that out. I just wish I could try the dogs. Look at this table. I love that. Someday I'm gonna bring my girlfriend here. She loves corn dogs. After they're cooked, she gives them a little kiss. She kisses burritos too and sings to cookies while she's cooking them. She's a little slip of a thing, but she loves food. Well, we did it. We visited the birthplace of the corn dog right here in Springfield, Illinois. Keep it cozy, gang. Keep it cozy. As epic as that is, believe it or not, that's not the most famous site in Springfield, Illinois. Just a little ways up old Route 66 into town is something amazing. This little house was the home of a man born the 12th of February in 1809. A self-taught man who was raised in log cabins, who, through reading books, taught himself to be a lawyer, became a philosopher and a statesman, and for 17 years lived in this quiet neighborhood in Springfield. This was the home of the 16th President of the United States, the great emancipator. You might know him from the penny, Abraham Lincoln. My favorite president lived right here in this house. Sort of unbelievable, but what's even more unbelievable is I've got a ticket to go inside. I am very excited about this. I love Lincoln. Wow.
The parlor, which is really the fanciest room in the entire house. The two sofas, the one in that room and the one behind me, also belong to the Lincolns. There's that nice little table between the windows with the marble top. That's original. There's a really large bookcase with a desk on the bottom. That was Lincoln's secretary. That's also where their son Eddie died. Eddie Lincoln only lived to be not quite 4 years old. Died just 2 weeks before his birthday.
Abraham Lincoln's dining room. Honest Abe's ham. And Abraham. The sitting room.
Basically the family room or the living room of the day. And it's where Mr. Lincoln spent time with the family, where they would have relaxed. Mr. Lincoln himself was usually laying on the floor doing some of that reading. Maybe play with his pets. He had a dog most of the time. Dog he had here when he was elected president was actually named Fido. We are not making that up. Lincoln was great at doing many things. Coming up with pet names was evidently not one of them.
Now upstairs, Mr. Lincoln's original banister. That's amazing that that's original and lasted so long.
We have a really neat picture of Walt Disney standing by the front door pointing at the Lincoln nameplate.
Wow.
And he came 3 times and just popped in. I mean, it wasn't like it was an event or anything. So here we are in Mr. Lincoln's bedroom. This, by the way, is where you need to kind of watch where your feet are. He says, putting his foot back on the blue carpet. This is his half of a master suite. In those days, actually not all that common for families, had a bigger house like this. to have a master suite for the husband and wife. That meant separate bedrooms.
Is this Abraham Lincoln's original chamber pot?
It is not, but it is there for the reason you think it is.
Ooh.
I will tell you, however, and I don't just always point this out, in Mrs. Lincoln's room we have a box with a round lid on it. It's made out of mahogany. That is Mrs. Lincoln's commode. It is actually her original toilet. Right.
Whoa. Well, it's a piece of history. Mrs. Lincoln's commode. How about that? This is why I travel, to learn. Wow. It's so crazy to be in here. It blows my mind to walk through Abraham Lincoln's house, see his bedroom, see his kids' bedrooms.
To the left is what we call the hired girl's room, and most of the time that the Lincolns lived here, they had a hired girl. She'd be about 15 to 20 years old. They were about $1.50 a week. That was the going rate, and she got room and board.
Dang, that's a heck of a deal. Wow. The Lincoln kitchen. The Lincoln flapjack. Unbelievable. Oh my gosh.
Mr.
Lincoln, it's nice to meet you. You have a beautiful home there.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Where are you from?
California.
We've had a good many folks go from Springfield go out to California to dig gold, and most of them apparently didn't find much.
Well, I didn't find much either. Well, it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Wow. The 16th president. Nice guy. Too bad we can't give him another term. Whoa, look at this. The Lincoln outhouse. Lincoln's first White House. That's where they left the Lincoln logs. This is so epic. The ultimate fun pick happening back here. I don't know how my day can get any better. I just met Abraham Lincoln. Look at this. Not just Lincoln's house, but Lincoln's whole neighborhood was preserved by the National Park System. After President Lincoln was assassinated, his wife Mary Todd could not stand the idea of living here without him, so they rented it out for a short time before his son Robert eventually donated it to the state of Illinois. That's why the house is so well preserved and has so many original Lincoln artifacts in it. Of course, it's been, redone a few times, but essentially the house is still the same as it was in 1860, when downstairs in that very house, Abe Lincoln learned that he had won the election. The White House years were not kind to the Lincolns, so this was their happy place, the only home Abraham Lincoln ever owned. He was an absolute failure as a businessman, a backwoods nobody who became a lawyer and then president of the United States. The epitome of the American dream, that from nothing, someone can turn themselves into anything. I'm a huge fan of Abraham Lincoln, so that was really cool for me, and it really bothers me that modern historians or certain modern people, to get attention, make a name for themselves, try to put down Abraham Lincoln or twist it and try and turn him into less of a good guy. Don't get me wrong, Honest Abe wasn't perfect, but he's still a hero and maybe one of the greatest men who ever walked the earth. And he walked that earth right here in Springfield. There were parades here and rallies when he became the president. His kids played in the street here. He would pick up stray cats from this neighborhood and bring them home. And between here and the old state capitol where he worked, he would often stop and dawdle and talk to all kinds of people in the streets and tell them, well, what back then was a kind of racy jokes. He was honestly quite a character, not very well liked in his own time, at least not in Washington, but almost universally loved in Springfield. There's a famous picture of Abraham Lincoln standing right between these two fence posts. That is pretty crazy. The guy from the penny, right here. Wow, that's awesome. Yet again, Route 66 takes us right to the heart of history. I just realized I'm wearing the same shirt from yesterday. Luckily, there's a place I can go to solve that little problem. Mr. Lincoln Souvenirs. If only there were somewhere I could buy some Lincoln stuff. Oh yeah, there we go. Now I'm ready to party. Springfield is also home to the epic Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. Having gone in there, I can tell you there's no way I can do it justice in this video. It needs a whole separate video unto itself. One of the best museums I've ever seen, but I gotta tell you, when I popped in, they didn't have Lincoln's hat on display. I was kind of bummed. I want to see Lincoln's hat. Springfield was the new capital of Illinois when Abe Lincoln showed up here as a 28-year-old with nothing to recommend him and no money. On the other side of this square, Lincoln boarded with strangers and had his first law practice in Springfield. Those buildings no longer exist, but just across the street from the old state capitol is Lincoln's last law office building. Right up here on the 3rd floor were the law offices of Lincoln and Herndon. Lincoln used to drive Herndon crazy by letting his kids run wild up there. On the second floor was an old federal court where Lincoln practiced law, and this would have been the epicenter of Lincoln's presidential campaign. When Lincoln left for Washington, he told his partner to leave their sign out in front of the door. That way, he said, if he makes it back from Washington alive, they can just go on practicing law like nothing ever happened. Pretty good location for lawing, especially if the court was on the second floor of the building, but also a good location for politics, given that the state capitol was right here. And it was in this old state capitol building where Lincoln first gave his famous "A house divided against itself cannot stand" speech. Wow. Pretty quiet in here now. There's a lot of different stuff in this building. Would have been bustling in Lincoln's time. I'm in the halls of power now. Look at this. Representative Hall. This is amazing. Not only was Lincoln here giving speeches while he was alive, this is also the room where his body came to lay in state for its final funeral before burial. 75,000 people passed by Lincoln's casket in this room to pay their respects. And overseeing it all, the portrait of George Washington. The very same portrait Lincoln would have seen as he sat in the Illinois state legislature. The same portrait that hung behind him while he gave his famous House Divided speech and others as he launched his national political career. And the same portrait of George Washington that hung in this room when tens of thousands of people said their final farewell to President Lincoln. That's amazing. Old Honest Abe spent a lot of time in this room. This is a place he'd be very familiar with, and I think he sat right there. How about that? They still use this room for special events. Actually, I was just told that 2 people had their naturalization ceremony here. 2 people became citizens of the United States right in there yesterday. Imagine that. That is awesome. Okay, the clock is ticking. No time to linger. There's one other place we have to get to before the end of the day. I'd like to come back and spend a lot more time in Springfield sometime. There was a lot more to see and do here than I was expecting. But right now, I'm a slave to the route, and Route 66 is calling me towards Chicago. Just one more thing we have to do before we leave the city of Lincoln. And that, my friends, is to go and pay our respects to Mr. Lincoln himself. When Abraham Lincoln was in office, he was one of the most controversial and most disliked presidents of all time, but he died as a martyr, having won the Civil War and died the most beloved U.S. president of all time. Because of this, they wanted to bury him in Washington, D.C., maybe even inside of the Capitol building, but Mrs. Lincoln refused. She wanted Abe to be buried in Springfield, and so his body was brought up here to Oak Ridge Cemetery, where it's been ever since. This is Lincoln's monument, built and rebuilt a few times. It's been standing like this in its current form since the 1930s, and thousands upon thousands of people have come here to pay their respects to Mr. Lincoln. And now it's our turn. Much bigger place than you would think from the outside. I've been standing in here a long time, having a moment with Mr. Lincoln. He's buried 10 feet below this giant stone, encased in steel and concrete. And there's a good reason for that, which we'll get to later. Up above him are the words of his Secretary of War, Edward Stanton. Now, he belongs to the ages. Spoken April 15th, 1865, at the bedside of the fallen man, now echo true through the centuries. The president's family is also here. Mary Todd and his sons Eddie, Willie, and Tad. His other son Robert is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. This is one beautiful place. And now a moment of silence for Mr. Lincoln. other people some time with the president. Wow, that was an amazing moment there. Like I said before, Lincoln isn't actually buried in there. That red granite thing, that's just a marker. Lincoln is about 10 feet down below that room. You see, in 1876, a gang of Irish counterfeiters had recently had one of their members get busted, and so they came up with a great idea. We'll steal the body of Abraham Lincoln and hold it for ransom and in exchange for letting our buddy go. There was just one problem with their brilliant plan, and that's that they weren't very good counterfeiters, and the Secret Service, which was in charge of fighting counterfeiting, had their eye on these guys. So by the time they came out here and partially removed Abraham Lincoln's coffin from its sarcophagus, they had the Pinkerton Detective Agency and the Secret Service out here to bust them in the act. The only problem was the Pinkertons and the Secret Service thought they were shooting at the bad guys, but were really shooting at each other. Meanwhile, the bad guys hightailed it out of here. Luckily, they were eventually captured, but this made people very paranoid as to the fate of Lincoln's body. They did not want a repeat of that episode at all. So, instead of putting Lincoln's body back into the stone sarcophagus, they actually hid it in the basement, in the corner, under some rubble. For years. Finally, the indignity was ended at the turn of the century. They had to remodel this whole thing anyways, and so they wanted to reinter the president properly, but his son Robert had some demands. The coffin was placed 10 feet below that marker, inside of a steel cage, and encased in tons and tons of concrete. And so our beloved 16th president was finally put to rest. Incidentally, between the time that he came here on his funeral train and he was interred that very last time, because of multiple sightings of a shadowy Lincoln-like figure walking around the grounds, leading people to believe that maybe his spirit wasn't at rest. This was the Victorian era after all. Newspapers started reporting that maybe the president's body wasn't in his coffin. So it was opened multiple times, and they had friends of Lincoln's make sure to confirm that he was still in there. Dude, every time they moved that thing around, they had his friends come up here, open the coffin, and take a peek at the very well preserved face. The president had, after all, been embalmed at least 6, maybe 7 times on his funeral train on the way here. Abraham Lincoln's life story was very inspiring, very amazing, and very important to the country. His death story is just weird. To this day, there's a caretaker's residence right next to the Lincoln tomb, and they're not gonna let anyone mess around with old Abe now. The president can finally rest in peace. All right, before we go, there's one final thing that we have to do. Over the years, it's become a tradition to stand outside of the tomb here, come up to the statue, and rub his nose for good luck. I don't know why. In fact, I don't think anyone knows why. But I can use all the luck I can get. Thank you, Mr. President. All right, this was a very serious and somber stop. The first time I came here years ago, I was much more emotional. I handled myself better today. And now it's time to go from this very serious, somber spot to something much more silly. Oh, would you look at the size of that Lincoln? This gargantuan statue of Abraham Lincoln, the rail splitter, has been standing here on the Illinois State Fairgrounds since the 1960s. Oh, I love this thing. Now that, my friends, that is a work of art indeed. Wow. Clearly Lincoln made a big name for himself in Springfield. Lincoln was well known for chopping wood. He was known as the rail candidate when he was running for president because he was out there living in log cabins when he was growing up, chopping the firewood, building rail fences. He always said he was comfortable with an axe in his hands, and just before being assassinated, Abraham Lincoln even visited the soldiers and helped them chop their firewood. So I like to think that he'd be pleased with this tribute here. That's awesome. I love how funky and folksy and kind of DIY that looks there. You can see there's a little damage going on. I can see Lincoln wobbling in the breeze. He might need a restoration. Or maybe a reconstruction? No? Lincoln joke, okay. Honest Abe roadside attraction style. That is amazing. I doubt many people would say this is the finest representation of Lincoln that we have. but it's certainly one of my favorites. Heck yeah for Old Abe. All right, guys, back on old Route 66, headed north towards Chicago. Springfield was a good time. I'd like to come back someday. But I've been on Route 66 for a month now, so it's time to start thinking about wrapping it up. After all, I do have to drive all the way home. Oh, it's nice to be back on the Morher Road. Looks like we're rolling into Elkhart, Illinois. Oh, this is the downtown. Literally, this is the downtown. This and that's it. I love towns like that. Watch this, let's turn around. We can do it again. Oh yeah, cruising through downtown Elkhart. Love it. Good times. A little further along, we come to Broadwell, Illinois. Check out this old motel over here. There's just something about those old signs that I love. Looks like this is a private residence or maybe someone's storage now. Not much going on here at the moment, but at one time, this was an important and very famous stop on Route 66 because like the sign says, Broadwell was home of the Pig Hip restaurant for over 50 years. A guy by the name of Ernie Edwards, the old coot on the route, used to serve up his pig hip sandwiches right over here. After he retired, the original pig hip was turned into a museum, but sadly it burned down a number of years ago. But apparently those pig hip sandwiches were pretty unforgettable because Route 66 fans have made sure that Ernie's restaurant will never be forgotten. The pig hip. Man, that either sounds disgusting or delicious. I'll take a pig hip on a gluten-free bun, please. I love Route 66. But you know, I just can't get old Abraham Lincoln out of my head. Well, up ahead is the town of Lincoln. Maybe there'll be something there that can help me just get it out of my system. Yep, this might do the trick. Look at that giant Abraham Lincoln still reading the law on the world's largest covered wagon. Wow, wow. All I can say is wow! It didn't seem that large to me until I compared it with the car parked directly behind it. Oh my goodness. It's 25 feet tall, 12 feet wide, and 40 feet long. That's 8 alleys long. That's incredible. The best part of this is that it was built by one guy and actually rolls on its wheels. It was pulled here by a tractor. The man's name was David Bentley, and I guess he needed something to keep him busy after recovering from heart disease. Yep. That'll certainly do ya. I don't know that Lincoln ever traveled by covered wagon, but the giant Lincoln is just the cherry on top. Oh, and don't worry, he may be reading the law, but he's still got his trusty axe on board. Dang, I bet they would have loved to have a 40-foot wagon on the old Oregon Trail, huh? You would have needed a lot of oxen to pull this bad boy. It's crazy that this thing is 5 alleys tall. Oh, 5 alleys. Get a hold of yourself. Sorry, Mr. Lincoln, starting to get a little lonely out here. Well, that's certainly understandable, young man, but could you move along? I'm trying to read. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry to disturb you, Mr. President. World's largest covered wagon. Hey, what'd I tell you? Sorry. Turns out Lincoln, Illinois is also home to this epic former restaurant built in 1929. You know, nowadays when all buildings and restaurants and fast food chains are all sort of cookie cutter and they all look the same, it really makes you appreciate the creativity that went into all these roadside relics. It's no longer a restaurant, now it's a museum, and luckily for me, it's open. Ooh, wow, a lot of Route 66 relics in here. One of the original pig hip signs. So that's what it would have looked like. And look at this, you can't hate any place that has a robot. Ooh, okay. So this used to be a restaurant, huh? Home of the schnitzel. I've never had a schnitzel before. Well, what do you know about that? So that's what it used to look like. And this is the old bar. Yes, awesome. And all those,
it's the original wood and so forth. And it had all those clocks on it, but someone stole them all.
Darn thieves. I love coming to places like this and learning about local history I would otherwise have no idea about at all.
Thank you for coming. You have seen enough. Please leave.
Just wish the robot was a little friendlier. Now, apparently, Lincoln, Illinois is the only town ever named for Abraham Lincoln while he was still alive. And it was named for him when he was just a lawyer. When the railroad came here to sell off the town, they used him to help plot out the map and do lawyery stuff. And when local members of the community asked Abraham Lincoln to christen the site, he cracked open a watermelon, squeezed out some of the juice into a cup, and then poured it on the ground, saying nothing with the name of Lincoln has ever amounted to much. Well, apparently the town of Lincoln has never forgot how it got its famous name, and so it has this. The Lincoln Watermelon Memorial. Now that's a juicy story. We've seen a lot of Lincoln stuff today, but that by far is the weirdest slice. All right, I'm sure there's a lot more to see here because the town of Lincoln's a lot bigger than it looked like it was gonna be. But it's time to be moving along. All right, next up on our lightning tour is the town of Atlanta. Oh my gosh, look at the water tower. I feel so happy to be here now. A friendly town. Wow, it's a nice looking place. Wait a minute, what's that? Well, looky what we have here. It's nice to see a familiar knee. Yes, friends, it's another muffler man, a famous Route 66 muffler man holding his wiener on the side of the highway. He used to be located further towards Chicago in Cicero, Illinois. This is the Bunyan's Giant. He was purchased back in the 60s to advertise Bunyan's hot dogs. Look at that. I didn't know they moved it down here to Atlanta, Illinois. That is so sweet. Freshly painted too. Some members of the Illinois Route 66 something something association. There's a few of those here. We're just telling me about some of these other things like the Gunnar Mast trading post here, or the Old Palms Cafe and the Atlanta Museum next door. This is a very small downtown section, but it's got a lot of Route 66 stuff packed into this one block. Unfortunately, I showed up a little too late today to enjoy the shops of downtown Atlanta, but I can still enjoy a view of the old hand-wound library clock and enjoy this little Route 66 Park. Oh, that feels so good. We're halfway towards Chicago now on Illinois' Route 66. Basically just one day away from completing my journey, and it has been one gigantic adventure. Of course, we're gonna have a lot more on the way home, and then of course more when I get home, and then of course, you know, in the future we're gonna do more things and go more places. But there can only be one first time for completing Route 66, and I'm pretty excited to get there. All right, guys, we've seen an insane amount of stuff together today, so I think this is where we should quit while we're ahead. I will see you all tomorrow, a little further along down the road. Make sure to check out the links in the description, all that other good stuff. Follow me on Instagram, etc., and I'll see you later. Right now I need a hotel and sleep well. giant man holding a wiener. A giant man holding a wiener. A giant man holding a wiener on the Route 66. It's as American as apple pie.